One of the great things about the time that we live in right now is that it's easy to find a lot of different information. The problem is there's good information and there's bad information, and it's a lot easier for a person to find anti-Mormon information than it ever has been. As a kid growing up in my hometown, I don't know where I ever would have obtained anti-Mormon information if I would have wanted to, but now it's just a few clicks away. And Section 71 of the Doctrine and Covenants raises the question of how you deal with people that deliberately want to destroy or tear down your faith. Specifically, these passages deal with two members of the church who had apostatized and now were openly criticizing the revelations of Joseph Smith and the work of the church. These two individuals are Ezra Booth and Simon Ryder. Ezra Booth, you'll remember, was the person who was highly critical of Joseph Smith during their journey to Missouri to find the city of Zion and during their journey back. There were several times when he was rebuked and reproved by Joseph Smith after they returned, and he eventually left the church and started to write a series of letters to a local newspaper to criticize the faith. The other person that was raising problems for the church at this time was a man named Simon Ryder. Simon Ryder is kind of famous in church history for being the guy that left the church because his name was spelled wrong in one of the revelations that was given to him. Now, this is a lot more complicated than it sounds on the surface. For instance, the story that Simon Ryder left the church comes from a reverend who preached his funeral sermon. He said, quote, his Simon Ryder commission came and he found his name was misspelled. Was the Holy Spirit so fallible to fail even in orthography? Well, as we've tried to find out the correct spelling of Simon Ryder's name, we found out that there's actually several different spellings of his name. That in different documents, sometimes he spelled his first name Simons with an I and sometimes with a Y, and his last name Ryder, sometimes with an I and sometimes with a Y. In fact, we found Simon Ryder's headstone, and I'm sorry to say that if this is the correct spelling of his name is still misspelled in the Doctrine and Covenants even today, and we're deeply sorry about that. What's more likely is that back then, people sometimes did spell their name different ways at different times in their life, and we're making the best guess we can. It appears that the more compelling reason for Simon Ryder to leave the church and be upset with Joseph Smith really didn't have as much to do with his name as it had to do with the law of consecration. Simon Ryder leaked a copy of Section 42 of the Doctrine and Covenants, which contained the details of the law of consecration, to a local newspaper and claimed that it was part of a plot by Joseph Smith to seize the property of everybody that had joined the church. Because of this, Simon Ryder and Ezra Booth are both bitter enemies of Joseph Smith, and the dilemma becomes, how do we deal with them and what can we do to try and stop the falsehoods that they're putting out there? When Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon asked the Lord what they should do in this particular case, the Lord instructed them to set aside their translation of the Bible for a brief time, and then he said, wherefore confound your enemies, call upon them to meet you, both in public and in private. And inasmuch as you are faithful, their shame shall be made manifest. Therefore let them bring their strong reasons against the Lord. And verily thus saith the Lord unto you, there is no weapon that is formed against you that shall prosper. There are times and situations when it's okay for us to address people that are criticizing the church. We don't want to do so in a hateful or contentious way, but it's important that we stand up for the principles that we know are true and that we address the falsehoods and sometimes just outright lies that are propagated about the members of the church, their history, and their background. Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon took about a month off from the biblical translation and traveled around different locations like Shalersville, Ravenna, and other places setting forth the truth. Joseph Smith said they vindicated the cause of their Redeemer, showing that the day of vengeance was coming upon this generation like a thief in the night, that prejudice, blindness, and darkness had filled the minds of many and caused them to persecute the true church and reject the true light. Now that's how they dealt with anti-Mormons in their day.